Hey, welcome to the Real Squabble. Today, Dr. Tim Stratton joins us to talk about presidential elections, voting obligations, and justice, not just for Trump, but hey, who has the moral authority to adjudicate America's past sins fairly or anything that's gone on in our past? Dr. Stratton is a professor of theology. And you know what? I put it in here, Tim, and I deleted it out. Where's the school where you're teaching?
At Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. It's Braxton Hunter and Jonathan Pritchett lead that operation. And
Gotcha.
Guys like Leighton Flowers and I get to work together and try to educate people about ultimate reality.
Terrific. That's what I live every day is ultimate reality, and author of a fine book, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. I've got it all
Nice.
all painted up in crayon and such. So, do you have new editions, new versions coming out? Because
I'm currently working on a second edition. It's going to be a lot bigger, actually, and I'm and revamping a few things. I did feel slightly rushed going through that one, and I want to be a bit more philosophically precise. I still stand next to all the big arguments there. I've changed my view on a couple little things that don't really make much of a difference. Clarified some definitions, but then added many more arguments to support my case. So definitely looking forward to that. That'll be. I'm hoping to get that done this year, but I've been saying that for the last 2 years. So, but I have recently partnered with an editor who should help me speed up that process.
And if you're reading up on theological issues, you've probably heard of Calvinism and you've heard of Arminianism. I only learned from Dr. Craig and from Tim in recent years about the view of Molinism. Is fascinating. You've got to pick up his book and read it and read up on the subject. It's just really brilliant way of thinking about some theological subjects and about God's sovereignty, providence, and free will. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's right. And if somebody wants a shorter read, I just recently contributed a chapter to this book called Faith Examined. New essays for persistent questions, essays in honor, new arguments for persistent questions, essays in honor of Dr. Frank Turek. And so this is a book that multiple authors, most of whom I'm sure your audience is aware of, we partnered together, each wrote a chapter, and I wrote a chapter based upon the last chapter of my book, but kind of expanded it and clarified some things. So I encourage people to check out that book as well.
All right. Well, I'm going to work with you on shortening your titles a little bit.
Academic books.
That was the subtitle. Just the subtitle.
That was a subtitle.
Yeah, okay. You got to have that. Faith Examined. That's the main title. That's pretty good.
Faith Examined. Okay.
But Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. That's kind of a mouthful.
All right. Super. Yeah. And I look forward to that. Hey, before we jump in, let me remind you to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Real Squabble. As I said, we're looking at, the big discussion's all over, as you guys probably well know. And maybe you follow some of the stuff I've posted and Tim has posted on presidential elections that we're in the middle of, really. We're on the runway. Voting obligations and justice is another thing that has come up recently. You see it, people saying whether or not Trump is getting justice or not getting justice. And even beyond that, I want to talk about justice because of, what I've heard about things going on in America's past from previous shows we've had regarding slavery and reparations, and who has the moral authority to adjudicate such things. We'll try to roll into that. Hey, but before I ask you too many questions, I'd like to read from a Facebook post that I responded to the other day. No names. You can get the gist of the issues as I read my response, and feel free to comment as we go along. It's not really that long, but it says, as you know, I'm a retired American service member also who disagrees with you. This is me speaking. I support Donald Trump, as flawed as his personality is. I don't see how he has been made, as this person accused him of, an enemy of America and democracy. To me, that was just way too broad. And his actions were a slap in the face of every man and woman who gave their lives to this country so we might have freedom. Again, super broad. I don't believe that. My family doesn't believe that. Service members that I know don't believe that. I went on to say millions of great Americans don't believe that and will vote for Donald Trump on the advice of lawyers. And this is history. This is how it went down, to my knowledge, and a lot of this is based on the testimony before Congress and from Mike Pence, his vice president, who said he doesn't endorse him now. Okay, so he says, on the advice of 3 lawyers, he believed that he could change or challenge and send the electoral votes back to the states for redress or to the House for a vote. That's how our system works, right? So even if Pence did what Trump was recommending, and he was the one who had the choice, by the way, right? The Supreme Court likely struck it down. In my view, it's not un-American to challenge what some saw as vague constitutional law. Mike Pence was not even sure about the process.
Right.
He got advice from his own lawyers. So here's a little bit of the rub among maybe a lot of people, but it seems like the evangelicals are more entrenched. They've said that they aren't voting, or they're going to write in a random name, and to me, that will have zero effect. This is still part of my answer here, right? I said our choices are our choices, but it seems to me that not voting can have several residual effects, both on the person and on society as a whole. Individually, not voting means missing out on the opportunity to have a say in governance and shaping the future of one's community and country. Your disengagement from the political process, basically, it takes your power away. If you want to change the political landscape, it seems to me, maybe to you guys too, that you could protest in a more impactful way ahead of time, or as you roll into other elections, other than just not voting or putting some random name in there that makes you feel better or morally superior to those of us who are actually going to vote. All right. On a broader scale, and this is just the final part, the impact of not voting seems like it could result in skewed representation of policy outcomes. When certain people, demographics, or communities abstain from voting, their interests may be overlooked by elected officials, leading to underrepresentation and neglect of their needs. Additionally, low voter turnout can undermine the legitimacy of the democratic process and weaken the accountability of elected leaders to the public. Ultimately, I think that voting can contribute to a less responsive and inclusive democracy, and that was my 2 cents worth. Any, Glenn, would you like to go first? Any comments?
Yeah, I thank you. Good morning, Tim. Hi, Mike. I remember Mike, you and I had a little chat on the phone earlier this week, and we were both reminiscing about where we particularly live in our world. And I live in Washington State, and you live in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, or Maryland.
Yeah, Maryland.
Those things over there on the East Coast always blend into one thing in my brain.
Oh, okay.
But whether or not you or I actually vote in the presidential election in our respective states, the Democrat is going to win. So we were reminiscing about that. Whether I vote for somebody or not. So I was telling you that I voted all of the tickets except the president ticket. I didn't vote the president ticket.
Yeah. Now I kind of accepted that when we were speaking, but as I thought about it, I was like, well, actually in some states, like where people have won that are on the line, say like the state of Virginia. It gets carried most of the time by Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and the Fairfax area around northern Virginia. If actually all the people out there who could vote did vote, I think that they could win the state. But a lot of people have that mentality. Oh, the big city's going to take it, and it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They are likely going to take it. But if every voter went to the polls, it would have a dramatic impact, because honestly, I think most of the time, less than 50%, maybe even down to 20 or 30% of eligible voters are the ones who carry the elections. They're the ones who actually go to the polls. So, Tim, I said a mouthful there too, and I'm just wondering where you fall, because you've written some articles on us having a moral obligation to vote. You've had some kickback from one of our brothers, Dr. Baggett, down at Houston Baptist University. Him and a few other good brothers that we disagree with, maybe not as adamantly as others on Calvinism. But we're all still Americans. Many of us are Christians, and we want to have a peaceful, intelligent conversation about these things, regardless of which direction we go. And I would say, in light of the things that you write about as far as Molinism and God using human free choice in His providential plans, I take great comfort in knowing that regardless of whether I'm right or wrong, in my free will, and I said that the other day, I told someone that I think I told Dr. Purser down at Liberty University that I love the attribute of free will. It's a great thing, and I know that at the end of whatever's going on in all our good and bad decisions, that God is in control. So,
well, that's because He has middle knowledge. Right,
he has middle knowledge, right?
Yeah. So being a Molinist really does impact everything I'm doing right now, just being even vocally on these political issues. And right before we started the broadcast here, I posted on Facebook, don't confuse the word politics with objective right and wrong. I think a lot of pastors today are scared to talk about political issues. So they ignore the objective right and wrong of things that we're swimming in this culture and that need to be addressed by Christian leaders. So I say, hey, politics, that's left and right. But objective right and wrong is north and south. And pastors can avoid the left and right issues, but ought not avoid the north and south issues. Got to be vocal about that. Now, many times when we do that, that affects the left and right. And oftentimes, I get this quite often when I'm speaking about the objective north and what's objectively right and wrong, people will conflate that with, oh, you're just on the right. And I say, don't confuse the north with the right.
I like
oftentimes, and oftentimes when we speak about things that are objectively right, or talk about things that are objectively evil, that does shine light on if you ought to be thinking politically right or left. But I put my theology first, and the reason why, I base my view on everything else based upon what I believe is true regarding metaphysical reality, and that includes theology, because God is the necessary foundation of ultimate reality. And so,
I just let me hop in there if I could for 1 second, because I believe that people, I've been called a fanboy on Facebook of Trump, and worse, by the way. But my North Star is my Christian belief. And I am not a partisan Republican. I'm not even a registered Republican. I'm an independent. Right. So I believe about thinking it through. We can honestly think things through and come to different conclusions. But I try to think it through to weigh those issues. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah. So, to your point about libertarian freedom, God's middle knowledge, I believe that is true. And so I believe that we have a responsibility to handle this libertarian freedom, which is a power to choose between alternative options, right? And I'm the source who decides how to choose here. Okay, if that's true, and I believe Scripture is clear that we have that power, and I also use philosophical arguments to demonstrate that we have that power. So that's in my book that you've already promoted, but there you go. So this is a God-given power that we have. He's given us power to choose, and that's what it means to vote. And so I think we ought to not take that power for granted, especially when it involves our neighbors. If it was just about me, I can see voting for a third party or refraining from the vote, but I feel a sense of moral obligation that I cannot do that because of the second of all greatest commands is to love your neighbor. And even to love your enemies. I think the best thing for Marxists is for Marxists to not be in power, right? I think the best thing, I think they will flourish. I think humans tend to flourish better when Marxism is not in power. And I think that Marxism is the biggest threat to Western civilization today. And when I say Western civilization, that's code word for Christianity, really, or at least for Christian values or values that are consistent with Christianity, right? Judeo-Christian values. That's really what we mean when we say Western values. By the way, if there was no Jesus, there's no Western civilization today. If Jesus never existed, we would not have Western civilization the way we do today. I recommend Alvin J. Schmidt's book, How Christianity Changed the World. But I digress. Here's my view. And before I start, I want to make it clear, Glenn, that I totally get your position on refraining. And I may have done that. I haven't, but I could see how I could have done that in the past. This is why I can't do that now. I believe that we are blessed. I mean, Scripture is clear that those in political authority are that's under God's sovereignty, right? God is, in some sense, in control of political rulers, right? Well, who is the political rulers in this nation? At least to this point. 3 words: we the people, right? You have the power. You have power here. And the government officials, guess who they work for? They work for us. That's the way it's supposed to be. And we should not take that authority that God's blessed us with for granted. Right now, we don't have a lot of power, right? We never have, each person as an individual. We've each been blessed with 1 vote and a circle of influence. Now, because, Mike, you have this YouTube channel, you've got a larger circle of influence than maybe the average person.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a larger circle of influence than the average person. But everybody has a circle of influence, right? Everybody does. And we ought to use, and since we still have the freedom of speech, seems like barely sometimes, but and it gets suppressed oftentimes by algorithms, right? But we ought to be as vocal as possible. I put on Facebook yesterday. I said it's not, people have asked me if I just like to throw out these things on social media just for the sake of controversy.
Yeah, I've got the same stuff.
Debate, right? Do I just want to debate people? No, I actually, sometimes I hate this. But I have this sense of moral obligation,
right,
to not be quiet, to not be silent, to be vocal, so that my neighbors do not perish because of a lack of knowledge, as we see in Hosea. Right?
Because in a real way, Tim, that love is being it's being activated in policy. right? When we vote, when we vote for these people, and I get that people are. I honestly don't get that they're abstaining from voting. I don't even get, honestly, that they're voting for someone else, because it seems as though it's just the same thing. It's just a throwaway. So,
well, I see it as, for those, I think it's at this point in history. I can see it not being the case in the past, but we're at a different point in history right now. And at this point in history, I see it as selfish to abstain from using your power, as limited as it might be, using your power to oppose the greatest evil. Even Bill Barr gets this, who used to work for Donald Trump and had a falling out with him. He does not like Donald Trump, and Donald Trump does not like him. But Bill Barr was interviewed on CNN last week, and they were asking Bill Barr, what he thought, and Bill Barr was like, I think it's horrible that we're left with a binary choice. In all reality, a binary choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, because they're both bad. And then he said that he has a moral duty to support Donald Trump and to vote for him. And then CNN played the clip of Donald Trump's response to that, where Donald Trump was like, I've said all these bad things about, that's a horrible imitation, by the way. I can't imitate him, but I'll say, he said, I said all these bad things about Bill Barr. I said he was lazy and lethargic and blah, 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 all these different things. He goes, now that he's endorsed me, I'll take the word lethargic away, but he's still all those other things,
Yeah. Hey, but Tim, go ahead. But don't you understand that Donald Trump has been charged in 4 criminal cases? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, but then the CNN reporter asked Bill Barr what he thought of Trump's response, and he says, well, that's just classic Trump. And then she said, but he's mocking you.
Yeah.
And his response was perfect. He goes, so
right,
it's not about me. Amen to that. We should all learn from Bill Barr, even if you don't like Donald Trump. And honestly, I don't like him either, right? Personally.
Right.
But it's not about me. We should not be selfish here. It's about our neighbors and really the world. And I mean, so if you love your neighbors, as Bill Barr has pointed out, he said, Joe Biden being in power for another 4 years is the worst thing for our nation. That's where the most danger is going to come from. That's where the most damage to our nation and to our neighbors is going to come from. So I have a moral duty to cast a vote, and as I've said, to use your circle of influence to oppose the greater evil. And who will, and it's not just Biden, whoever wins the president brings around 5,000 people with them to Washington, D.C., right? These unelected bureaucrats who really change so much. That's, you hear about that as the swamp, right? Well, now here's the thing, man, I'm all over the place. I'm sorry, but you look at who Donald Trump surrounded himself with, those 5,000 people that he brings with him. Many of them are Christians, right?
What do you mean 5,000?
Well, it's not, you don't just vote for one person, you vote for their team. Even Mark Hamill, when he was endorsing Joe Biden the other day at the White House. And by the way, he killed Star Wars for me and killed my childhood hero of Luke Skywalker. But because, I mean, you look at Luke Skywalker. I mean, he was the ultimate rebel who would fight against the emperor and against tyranny. And now he's standing with Joe Biden, the ultimate real life emperor. Anyway.
Tim, let me say this. You know, I'm going to lose, some Facebook friends, I'm sure, but I do like Donald Trump. I think he had an amazing 4 years.
I like him in that sense. Yeah.
Do you like everything about his personality? No. I do not. I think he's behaved childish, immature, whatever.
Vile.
Yeah, well, a couple things probably you might consider vile. at least the way they've been interpreted by some
Wait a
of
second, North and South, vile. He has acted
Okay.
vile.
Uh-huh.
And I would say,
What comes to your
especially,
mind when you say vile?
oh,
The quote where he likes to grab women's genitalia. That is a vile human being.
Of course, but that was 10 or 15 years ago, and
Yeah.
he's claimed to be a more redeemed person. Some pastors have said that he's a immature Christian, which, you know, I can give grace to a lot of immaturity in my life. I don't think he was also a Democrat then, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I see in the Christian community also people not allowing for any type of redemption or moral progression in his life. I didn't see any of that language or behavior while he was president. He probably, I've got lists of things that he did, and I've looked at lists of things that Ronald Reagan did, and I loved Ronald Reagan, but Donald Trump did more positive things for our country than Ronald Reagan did. Actually, if you read Mike Pence's book, So Help Me God, again, a guy who says he's not endorsing Donald Trump would probably approve that book, So Help Me God, as a biography of the great administration and friendship that they had. It kind of came down to things that happened on January 6th and people's opinions on how that went down. There's people that say he incited a mob. Well, I told someone the other day, it's like, for you to say he incited a mob is hindsight commentary. He was giving a speech. I've looked through that speech, and there's disagreement that I have with other Christian friends where I think that honestly, the speech was riddled with political rhetoric and idioms, just like Schumer has done, and Waters, and many others, that was not inciting anything. I thought it was a good speech. I think he said to go peacefully and patriotically. He was 1.6 miles from the White House up there. So for him to be able to see what was happening, it takes 30 minutes to walk up there. He responded within 23 minutes, and he had 2 responses via Twitter, and then did a video before the afternoon was up. So can you fault? Yeah, they fault you if you don't breathe at the right second, if you're a Republican or a conservative. So I have difficulty hammering him for that. When I've seen letters that have gone to the Pentagon and other places in DC requesting National Guard. I saw from Mike Pence's book that he asked Mike Meadows, as chief of staff, the day before to bring in more National Guard, and Mike Meadows said that he would handle it. So it seems that Donald Trump was not looking for trouble, to incite trouble, and that he was as surprised by the mob that eventually did go into the Capitol. And I do believe that was horrendous. It was a horrible thing that they did. Were they trying to take over the country, kill democracy, all those things? I don't think so. Maybe if they were, I mean, how can I know?
They did it without weapons.
They did it without weapons. And did they scare people? Yeah. It was wrong what they did.
Yeah.
But to blame Donald Trump for their misconduct, I think, is just a bridge too far. Even if you don't like Donald Trump, to say that he was giving a speech to a mob, that's biased hindsight commentary. And also to say, I'm not going to vote for him because he's been charged or indicted. Well, look, you are innocent until proven guilty. I get it. You don't like what he did 15 years ago. If you knew what I did 15 or 20 or 30 years ago, you wouldn't vote for me for president either. So I'm not going to go there.
We couldn't vote for Jesus or Paul either because they were charged by the law.
Right. They were falsely accused and convicted.
Right.
It's funny that you would mention that. I put that in my notes to bring up. It's like I think, we've got to apply the logic across the board and not let our emotional bias get the best of us.
Well, amen.
At the end of the day, are you going to your choice is your choice, as I've said over and over. You're not likely. I have no idea how Glenn is going to vote, but if he's decided that most of what I have just said is false, he's going to vote the way he wants to vote because he has decided that what I'm saying is not true. As I am, or any American. I'm only using you as an example, Glenn. You know,
Right.
You're
So
going.
it would be a lot more challenging if I lived in a battleground state. It is no challenge here. There are 3 counties in the west side of Washington State that carry the national elections, the state elections every time.
But do you know that in your state,
and even if you took all of the rest of the state and added up all of the people who are there, it wouldn't ever override anything. They absolutely have a super majority of people, and it's a very liberal, like any megalopolis is. It's a very liberal center. So that is, you have almost no chance of winning as a Republican in Washington State. Maybe
almost no chance. And
maybe some of the local elections.
Right. No, I get that.
Though. I get it. I totally get it. But I would still, I think about Captain America when he's fighting Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, or no, in Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
And he just wielded Thor's hammer, and the whole crowd thought, oh, now Captain America is going to beat Thanos. And then Thanos turns it around and just annihilates Captain America and destroys his American shield. It's just barely on his arm. He's all bloody and he's laying there and he stands up and he realizes, I cannot beat him. There's nothing I can do. And then he tightens what's left of his shield up. Got it here on my shirt. And he starts walking to just do the right thing, even though he knows there's almost no, there you go. There's almost
we win every time.
Right. He knows there's no way he's going to win, but he's going to do the right thing anyway. And I'm saying, using your power, don't be a defeatist.
Right.
Use the limited power you have. Tighten up that shield.
So a defeatist would be somebody who doesn't vote.
Or no, who doesn't? No, I would say no. I'm going to say use all your power to oppose the greatest evil. Yeah, and that is to use your vote against Biden is what and the strongest way, and not just vote for a third candidate. It is to vote for Trump. That's now I got to tell you, I am not going to seek to impose this upon your conscience. I am just saying, I personally have that a sense of moral obligation that if I were in your shoes, that's what I would have to do. If you see things at the end of the day differently, then I say you have to do what you think is right. And so I will support you. But I'm saying I'm just trying to give some justification for what I believe I am morally justified if I were in your shoes.
And what we want to have happen is people go to the polls. So really what we want to do. Go to the polls,
right?
Use what convictions you have in your heart and make a mark or don't make a mark. But if you don't go to the poll, you don't have an opportunity to complain about it.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, it's funny that you would bring up Marvel and all that because I was going to bring it home just between you two tough guys, you and me, Tim. Oh no, Clint's disappointed now.
I was in the Army. Doesn't that count?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I count it.
Well, see, I don't even want to go up against you, man. But say Tim and I are in a fight, and Tim was a wrestler, right?
I was an MMA fighter.
MMA fighter, and I'm a black belt. Maybe you are too. I don't know.
I am.
Right, but in karate, and I studied in high school taekwondo and various forms of things. Yeah. But you've got a much tougher haircut than me, even though mine is pretty doggone tough now. You're likely in better shape than me, even though I can run 6 miles in under an hour for a 63-year-old.
Yeah.
But
I gotta say your knees might be better than mine at this point.
Maybe, but I'm also probably 20 years older than you. Yeah. I don't know. We won't go there. So So what I guess what I'm saying is I'm likely to get my butt kicked by this younger MMA fighter guy. But you know what? If he comes at me, or I find myself in a situation where there's a fight that's going to affect me and my family, which is kind of the analogy I'm going with here, and those around me, I'm going to stand my ground. Maryland is not a stand your ground state, but I'm going to stand my ground, and Tim is likely to take me down. But I'm going to, now that I know that your weakness is your knees, I'm going to go, I'm going to be like a Thai boxer. I'm going to take your knees out.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Thai boxer also, but
yeah, with no knees. But I'm going to, the point is,
I get you.
I'm going to fight you with everything in me.
You ought to.
I'm not going to give control to the 90-pound weakling beside me who has no chance of beating you. Right. I have a chance, but that, to me, that's kind of analogous to what you're doing if you write someone in and you don't fight the fight.
So I actually wrote an article on my website called let me see if I have it up here. I don't have it. I could go find it, but I think it's called The Parable of the MMA Fighter and His Neighbor. And I discussed this in my article about voting for Donald Trump, and that one's called A Moral Obligation to Vote for an Immoral Candidate. So I encourage people to go to freethinkingministries.com and check out both of those articles. A moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate. That's around 4,000 words or so. And I co-authored that, and it had the eyes of many scholars and academics on it, including those who disagreed with me, including Dave and Mary Beth Baggett. In fact, they were we were discussing these things as I was writing it over close to a 2-month period of time.
Yeah. And he disagrees with you.
Disagrees, but and he actually changed my mind on some things as I was working on it. And so you'll see that reflected in there. I went from, Glenn, I told you I wasn't going to try to bind your conscience. And my original goal was to do that in that article. But as I was interacting with others who were disagreeing with me, I took a step back and said, you know what? I should not try to bind the other's conscience. I should merely give the justification for why I believe that I personally have a moral obligation to vote for Donald Trump, and let others do with that what they will. And it's hard for me not to go there sometimes because if I'm honest, I want to. My flesh wants to bind your conscience, but I have to be careful not to do that. And I try to be. So if I ever do, keep me accountable. But let's get back to this parable of the MMA fighter and his neighbor. And I wrote this, I think, in 2020. That article, and it was about, suppose that there's an MMA fighter. And he's got all these different fighting skills. He's trained in karate and Muay Thai kickboxing and jiu-jitsu and wrestling. He's got all these skills. And he's a really good fighter. But he's also he's got this moral I call it a moral high ground where he's like, well, since I'm so trained and I've got all this power, if I ever fought somebody in real life, I would only throw my left-handed jab at them. And my left-handed jab is good. That left-handed jab is probably strong enough to beat most people. But I just can't justify using all the power I have to stop an evil person. I'll just use my left-handed jab. You know, if they were to come into my house or attack me on the street, just the left-handed jab. Well, now there's a suspected rapist and murderer on the loose. And one day he sees that his neighbors have left, leaving only their teenage daughter there alone. And he knows that. In fact, the neighbors asked him to keep an eye on the house. Well, he looks out the window and he sees the suspected rapist and murderer trying to get into their neighbor's house. And so he's like, I'm going to go defend my neighbor. I'm going to go defend my neighbor, this teenage girl. And so he runs over there and he's like, "Stop it, bad guy. I'll fight you right now to defend her life." And then he only starts throwing these left-handed jabs. He goes, "I cannot justify doing anything else to you." And he just starts throwing these left-handed jabs. He doesn't use his full power. And ultimately, he loses to this guy, but he kept his moral high ground, right? But he loses to this guy. And then the guy goes on to rape and murder the teenage girl. Question in this parable: did the MMA fighter really love his neighbor? I'm going to say no. He failed her morally because he did not use the full power that he'd been blessed with to stop evil.
Yeah.
And that's the way I see it. Each one of us in America right now has one vote and a circle of influence. And we ought to use all of it. So for those, and I say at this point in history, those who either abstain from voting for president or write in a third party, you're just throwing left-hand jabs. And in fact, you're opening the door for evil and saying, well, I didn't vote for him. Well, you still open the door. And I say, look, if the Democrat machine that's infected with Marxism right now can't get your vote, they love people who are going to abstain or vote third party. They love those folks. And so I say, don't give them anything to love about you. Oppose.
Well, there's a lot to love. There's a lot to love about Glenn, though.
I'm sure there is, but don't. But the stuff that we should love, evil hates, right? And I don't want evil to love anything about me.
Well, I love Glenn. That's why I'm going to vote for Trump. But what was the name of your article? A moral choice. What's it called?
A moral obligation to vote for an immoral candidate.
When you first read that, I'm thinking immoral. Of course, there is none of those candidates that are moral. There's no candidate that we've ever had that you could call moral. That you could call moral, right? Depends on where on the compendium you want to put them. But when you use the word moral, I always like to take it like to the worst case scenario. So when you first came out with that, I thought, and Glenn and I both lived and served in Germany for a long time, and we've probably both been to Dachau and Auschwitz and places like that. And if you were a Jew and you were in a concentration camp, this is a hypothetical, because there were some camps that were likely some guards that treated people better than others in different places, even though it was mostly the worst evil on the planet. But if hypothetically you were at a concentration camp and you were given a vote between like the evil camp that was up in the northeastern part of Germany that was an all women's camp where the women were just horrendous and just the most vile creatures on earth, the way they tortured and hurt people, as opposed to a camp where you were beaten maybe and had some bad things done to you, and you were actually given a vote. Would you abstain if you could vote for the person that wasn't going to actually torture you but just make your life miserable, right? And to me, there was no question. I would hang with the person who was going to make my life miserable but wouldn't torture me or throw me in the ovens. I would not abstain.
Especially if it's not about me or if it's not about you, but it's about our neighbors. I'm going to vote for the person who's not going to do the most damage to my neighbors. This is that for me. It's not about. I agree with Bill Barr. It's not about me. It's about our neighbors. And when we keep the greatest commands in mind, I think things become clear.
Let's move into one other quick subject, because I'd sort of promised it at the beginning, and we may not do it full justice here, so we may carry it into another show. And Glenn and I and others on the team have touched on it on quite a few shows, and that is the sins of America, especially given slavery and how to adjudicate that, right? With reparations. You're hearing a lot about that. I won't go all into the fact that the Italians and the Jews and the Irish and everybody lived in squalor. They were treated, in many cases, their conditions were just the worst that have been seen on the planet, with and Italians being lynched in Texas, lots of cases of atrocities and wrongs being done in America. The most prominent, of course, being known is slavery, which it seems like we've had a moral progression in our country from the beginning, where we decided not to import slaves. Then within 60 years of becoming a nation, we fought over it and got rid of slavery. It's been like 158 years since slavery, but now 158 years later, people are asking for justice. And one African American professor from the University of St. Louis that I spoke to said that he believed that we could not adjudicate our own problems, that we needed to have an outside party, an outside nation do that. I have thought about this. I'd like to get maybe your first initial thoughts about that, Glenn and Tim. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd just like to hear what you think about. Do you think that we could fairly adjudicate that, given that we're told now that we live in a systematically racist country, and everyone seems to define that differently,
right?
And I know what I feel.
Well, I'll tell you one thing's for sure: nobody could adjudicate that correctly if they don't stand and affirm the philosophical and theological foundations of America, because you're not going to get better than that. That everybody has God-given rights that are objective and unalienable and ought not be violated by anybody, including governments. And in fact, the government ought to protect your God-given rights. So first of all, to have somebody from another nation who does not stand on that foundation cannot correctly, in an objective sense, adjudicate any problems that we have.
Yeah, don't we get into some type of fallacy? And I don't know what to call it. Maybe it's just a racial fallacy, because I spoke to one of my cousins who's a lawyer in Georgia, and she said, justice is supposed to be blind, and we continue to work toward justice being blind. Is it always? No, not for everybody, not for anybody. It's not always blind. Mm-hmm. But, in the case
let me jump in here a little bit. I've got a bit of a vested interest in this, being the only white guy in my immediate family. For those of you who don't know, my wife is black, so that makes my children black. They identify as black.
Right.
So I've had a chance. We'll be 33 years married this year. So I've had a chance in my married life to make the transition from the ignorant, high caste, white male Montana boy to be able to see the racial disparity and the fact that it's really a caste system, just like the caste system, although it's not called a caste system in America, it's called racism, but it is a caste system where the darker your skin is, the more non-white you are, the farther down the food chain you are, and the untouchables of America. And I'm stealing all this from a book called Caste, and can't remember who wrote it because it's on my Audible. I'd hold it up, except it's an audiobook I'm listening to. But this is something that until we can actually wrestle with this individually, we can't fully comprehend what it is that is gone on. The fact that, and here we are, three white males talking about this. We occupy the high ground in the caste system, but we do not occupy the moral high ground.
No, that doesn't mean we can't approach it as much unbiasedly as possible, and try to be fair, because my first thought is, can a black judge fairly adjudicate me in court in Annapolis? Yes, of course they can. As a matter of fact,
I got to push back on the moral high ground here. I will speak for myself, and don't lump me in with others who aren't me, but I do occupy the moral high ground here, because I am seeking to understand ultimate reality and the law above the law, and to think and act and speak accordingly. So as soon as anybody tries to say that just because I'm white, I don't occupy the moral high ground, I'm going to say that's objective evil, and that's racism right there. I'm not saying you're evil, but I hear this a lot from non-white people.
So my point is just that because we are white males doesn't mean we occupy both the caste high ground and the moral high ground. That is
Right.
Even though things have come easier to us because of the situation that we occupy in the caste system, it does not mean that we automatically
and to the caste system, it's vital to distinguish between how some people act culturally, and what's on the books, what is law, what is legal, and what is illegal. And we are not a caste system according to law. And so if somebody is treated opposed to objective reality, that's why we have the court system. And we ought to push back on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me jump in real quickly.
I mean, I just want to say, I'm married. Really quick, I'm also married to. I mean, does she look white? Yes, but she's Native American, and so both my wife and my son are card-carrying Native American. So and we get some benefits from that. And I'm thankful.
I am Native American. Yeah. I am Native American, Jew, and hillbilly. So okay, but let me say this, because I've read a lot of American history, and you just can't start to address this at America or us becoming a nation, because once we became a nation, we started a moral progression toward fixing the problem. Is it totally fixed? No, but our sins are historic, going back thousands of years. Everyone impacts everybody. All cultures impact all cultures. Africa impacts Africa, right? So that when we go back, we have to understand that England was a caste system. Europe was a caste system. It was all monarchies. And it was King George who was establishing the colonies of America. And they were all lords and ladies coming over, and my people, the hillbillies that went back into Appalachia, they were the peasants. They were not in the echelons of the caste system. They were not treated well. The Scottish people who came over, the Irish, the Italians, they were not part of a caste system. There was a historical, what do you want to call it? There could be historical afterglow.
Mike, they were, because as soon as they got here, they were no longer the bottom rung of the caste as they were in Europe. They weren't. They were, at least I'm not black. It's something that you'd seen.
My people,
and it was an absolute reality. You may be poor and have absolutely nothing to call your own, but at least you weren't black. And that's how some people felt. That's a reality of the caste system in America. No, it's not law. It's like I say, the caste system. Right. The caste system isn't law in India either, but it's still an issue. It is illegal.
Right. Now, there's where I don't disagree with you. I think it's an issue. I think it's an issue that we should work to resolve. I believe that we should stop addressing it, though, by the color of our skin, kind of like Martin Luther King Jr. did. I think we need to look for those opportunity zones that that were up in the last administration. I think we need to be looking to lift up the oppressed, the underprivileged, and to fight injustice at every turn. But every time we start putting a color on it, I think we need to be able to say, yeah, America, our ancestors did some bad things. The Jews did some bad things in history. God, banished them a few times here and there. We've all have sin as part of our nature, if you take it from a Christian worldview. Right. If you don't, then you have no moral high ground, as I think Tim was alluding to. You have social, whatever you assert or vote on to be right or wrong. It's not objective, I guess is what I'm saying. It's a subjective moral underpinning for law. But I think our laws are based on a higher subjective law. And I, for one, and I've said this to my black friends, and I've said it to Glenn and I think we've touched on this before, Glenn, right? But it's like, if I see something in law, I'm going to fight to fix it. I'm a person, I'm that Captain Marvel type. I don't like to see anyone.
Captain America, not Captain Marvel.
Yeah,
Captain Marvel's pretty cool too.
Yeah, right. Okay. But if I see injustice ever since I was a child, and I grew up as a yeah, my roots are in Appalachia, but I'm a military brat. I grew up very cosmopolitan. I hate injustice in anyone. Was I impacted by some discrimination thinking from my family historically? Yes. And I remember my grandpa, whom I love a lot, me questioning him, a guy who was born in 1808, about being a racist. I went there, right? And he said, no, I just think they need to be in their place and we need to be in our place. Now, there's that kind of thinking sometimes, even though it's not overt, people still have these issues. I will tell you, though, when I'm out on the street, for me, and not everyone is like that, there are racists. Don't deny there's racism. There is racism. There are Black people that are racist. Right. There are Indians who are racist. When I came back from Germany as an American military brat, I was greeted by African-American racists at my middle school. Now, maybe they felt justified because of the things their parents and grandparents had told them about how white people treated them, but they did not improve the situation with the way they treated me, because me as a cosmopolitan military brat and a person from the South, I was immediately discriminated against and got into a lot of fights that I didn't initiate. That was my experience. Everyone has different experiences. That's not systematic. That was just pure and simple person on person hatred, which still exists. I hate it. I think us as Americans, especially as Christians in that North and South vein, we should always fight that, because there are people who are not thinking that way, that are white and every other color within our political system, that are not thinking that way, and will use the victim oppressor mentality of Marxism that you touched on earlier to create a divide in us. And we have seen that rhetoric that James Lindsay has spoken of on neo-Marxism and how the modern cultural Marxism, though, that racism and other things, even the things going on with the Jews now, it's being used as a wedge to get between American people. We need to be wise enough to see through that, work to fix problems, and really stop trying to divide into tribes. Because number one, I think there is no way to fairly adjudicate this, as you said. There's no way to figure out who's Black, half Black, part Black. Were they actually in our country prior to slavery? Did they come after? What degree were they actually come from slaves? And then even if you do, I'm going to tell you, my wife's family is going to want to make sure that the Italians are compensated for the lynchings, for the mistreatment, for living in 5 Points in New York, and the squalor and the rats infested neighborhoods that they lived in, that most minorities don't even touch on now. That early,
my wife is not only half Native American, the other half is Irish, so she's got a whole bunch of complaints that she could bring up too.
Right, but the thing is, if you open that door, is what I'm saying. If you open that door, okay, you may be right, you may be justified, and I'm not saying you're not, but I'm saying there is no fair way to adjudicate it, and there is no fair way to pay for it. Some of my American friends say, I would just like to have a national apology, and I would be all for that. I think just like the Southern Baptist Convention did, we should have a national apology. And I would say that right here on the Real Squabble. I am so sorry that my ancestors, if any part they played in it and our nation played in hate and discrimination and anything that is a residual effect in today's modern society, I deplore it to my bones as a Christian person. And I see us all as one blood, as Acts, the book of Acts talks about. So I feel for those that get dismissed or treated in certain ways. What I do see, though, on the streets is whether they're white or Black or young or old, if they're dressed like a gang member or like a neo-Nazi, I do judge them immediately because I don't want to get hurt. And that is that a stereotype? Yeah, it's a stereotype of the most people who commit crimes. My brother used to get stereotyped as a biker, but he was a good guy, but he wore, what do you call it, a do-rag, and he would show up and people would scatter. because he was being
Well,
judged.
Yeah, I back when I was coaching MMA, I'll never forget. One day I was it was open mat, and I was working out with some guys and wrestling with them and everything. And then this young black man walks in the front door, and he looked at me, and he gave me this weird look. He just wanted to come check the place out because he wanted to learn how to fight. And he looked at me, and he gave me this look like, "Oh, you're a skinhead." And then he goes, "But then you smiled at me, and I could see the Holy Spirit in your eyes."
Oh.
And he's awesome Christian, and we became brothers.
Yeah.
And we both punched each other so many times it was crazy, but we were brothers. And
I love that
together. Right. We fought and bled together, cried together, prayed together, and we were brothers. And the color of our skin just did not matter. But you asked, the original question is, how do we fix the sins of America's past? Well, you can't fix them because they're always going to be there. It's not like you can erase them. But here's what we do. One thing's for sure is you can't fight racism with more racism. It doesn't work. That's like say, hey, there's objective evil. Let's use objective evil to destroy objective evil. You can't do that. That's just going to make things worse. So the question is, and this gets us into gospel territory and on the atonement and how. The words I'm going to use now is the exact words I have used to explain the atonement and how the gospel works, how to restore damaged relationships, because that's what we are. God is necessary perfection, and we are infection. So we mix with God like oil and water, right? We were infection by definition cannot mix with necessary perfection. And so, but we were created to mix with God. That's the purpose, the objective purpose of our existence. But now, because God is perfection and we are infection, we mix together like oil and water. So we need help. So now the question is, how is a relationship restored? So it goes like this. God, as the offended party, has to be willing to take the harm, has to be willing to say, you know what? You did evil against me, and I'm not going to seek to do the same in return to you. I want the best for you. I want you to flourish. But the offending party has to be willing to repent and say, I am sorry, Mike, just like you just did. Say, I am sorry. That was wrong. I want to live for you, and I want to be in a love relationship with you. And so when the offended party is willing to take the harm and just take it and say, it's not, I am not going to seek to get anything back from you because I love you and I want you to flourish. And the offended or the offending party says, I am sorry. I want to make things right. I want to love you. Then damaged relationships can be restored. And let me tell you, many people, especially of other races and let's just, African Americans, they have been offended, right? And white people have been the offending party. Two things need to happen here. Right? We can even use the Marxist language of oppressed versus oppressors, right? The oppressed, those who have been offended, have to be willing to take the harm and say, you have offended me, you have oppressed me, you have hurt me, you have attacked me. But I am willing to take the harm because I want the best for you and I love you as my neighbor. And then the offending parties, right? Even if you're like, well, I didn't do it, that was my great-great-grandparents. Still, we should do what you just did, Mike, and say, I am sorry for what has happened. And if that sin is in me anywhere, please expose it. I am sorry. I don't want that because I want you to flourish as well.
Right.
Man, I thought we were going in the right direction in the 90s. Right? I felt like we were on the right direction. Definitely not perfect, but man, all my heroes were black. All of them. And I had so many friends in college who were black. People that I used to fight with as brothers, trying to make each other better. I mean, but that's how it works. the offended party has to be willing to take the harm, and the offending party has to repent, and we have to seek the flourishing of the other.
Right. And
that's just,
$2 million
America needs the gospel. Go ahead.
No,
what?
No, I get that. And $2 million payment to every person who's ever been offended doesn't fix a relationship. And there's going to be someone
that's not willing to take the harm.
And there's going to be someone out there who says, you know what, I need 3 million. And there's someone who goes, and I've heard other minorities, women too, because women got like the last right to vote in our country, who's going to give them reparations for how they didn't get to impact America at all. They had no vote. So that is the only solution, because no payment can ever fix it, nor can we as taxpayers ever pay it without honestly becoming Venezuela. It just would not be possible. So all we can do is reach that position you have. And Glenn, you have been the quietest, but since you actually you're like half black, so we'll let you go. We'll let you have a final word here on that subject.
Well, yeah, thanks. I think that having a reparation is probably a really poor idea. But it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a national apology, which I agree with you both, that there should be an actual apology, and it's not just for slavery, because we've harmed, like Tim, you brought up, we've harmed the indigenous peoples. I'm originally from Montana. We have plenty of indigenous peoples that have been harmed, that I grew up around, their relatives, their ancestors. It's got to be just more than just ticking off the box. So we can't just say, okay, we did the apology, let's move on. That isn't going to do it.
Yeah,
right. It has to be something that we can actually go, I understand, this is how I described to some of my relatives. I had a great aunt pass away. Mike, you've heard this story before. Great aunt passed away with no children. All of a sudden, the cousins got this great way. We had no idea great aunt had all this money, but my mom, one of the 8 cousins, they all of a sudden they get this great big windfall. It's 7 digits in seriously good 7 digits that everybody gets to split up. And but I'm trying to explain to my family who's benefited from this, that my children, because they're part of my family, are benefiting from this. But there's no chance that there's a rich uncle in their black line, because people couldn't have owned the property that my great aunt owned, the homesteads, the actual physical property, for as long as they did, to be able to have that kind of thing to pass on. So to be able to have a rich great uncle or great aunt somewhere in that line is not going to happen. And that's what I think that a lot of people don't really understand, is that there isn't a great aunt or a great uncle floating around there in 25 or 30% of the American population, because of the slavery.
Well, what I would say, Glenn, is that African Americans are about 11% of our population, so it's not going to be to the same extent, of course. But I will say that even between the Civil War and the early 1900s, there were, and I've looked it up, I could share it with on the posting, there were a substantial number of African American millionaires back then that became landowners. So within the last 100 years, it just seems like a non-argument. Are they behind the rest of the country? Yes. So, but instead of addressing it as a race, we should address it because, like I was saying earlier,
for every rich or wealthy African American that you can show from the time of the end of slavery, for that next couple of generations, you can also find stories of somebody homesteading a property and they, you're black, you can't have this property. Well, yeah, I can.
Sure.
It's my homestead. And then they run them off, kill them, right?
Sure.
There are more of those stories
Right.
than there are of the millionaire stories. So
yeah,
please don't say, yeah, there's a bunch of examples, so this didn't happen. That's not true. There's a whole bunch of examples of people who didn't get killed and didn't get their property taken away from them, but millions of, I don't know, millions but there you weren't allowed to own property, and if you did, you uppity, they're going to take it away from you. They're going to kill you. They're going to lynch you.
Right.
You weren't allowed to own it. So
no. I'm not disagreeing with you there. All I'm saying is those policies have long changed. Those policies are no longer true. All I'm saying is that there were a substantial
in our lifetime, there were black service members who got out of the military who weren't allowed to buy houses in areas that they wanted to buy houses. Right. It has changed, but it hasn't changed so very far away as we think it's changed. It still is a painful, redlining is a painful thing that still pops up.
True. And I think if we see it in policy, like I said, we need to address it. If it's anecdotal, we need to question it. Some of the things you and I were bringing up could be argued back and forth anecdotally. Even like I said, with my own Appalachian forefathers who mostly lived in poverty. There's lots of questions there. And I gave Glenn the last word on that subject. I'll give you, Tim, the last word on maybe the overarching topic of today with voting and the moral obligation and the whole ball of wax. Do you want to try to wrap up some of your thoughts?
I think in the article called "A Moral Obligation to Vote for an Immoral Candidate," my co-author and I, Josh Klein, pointed out that we thought that Marxism and ideas that have their roots in Marxist ideology is the greatest threat to our nation today. And I think that these Marxist ideas, or at least Marxist-inspired ideas, which is an atheistic philosophy, by the way, is what is most responsible for driving the wedge. Like I said, I thought that we were at least going in the right direction in the 90s. And I don't feel like America is going in that direction right now. If I've ever said "Make America Great Again," what I mean by that is, can we at least get America going in the right direction again? Because I think we've totally been derailed.
Mm-hmm.
And we see more opposition with each other right now. Racism seems to be all over the place now on both directions, with one side saying it's impossible for them to be racist because they're changing definitions. We just need truth, and we need to stand for truth. And I think we need to use, as Christians, all the power that God's blessed us with to oppose the greatest evil. I think that is to actively vote in such a manner to stop the Biden administration from continuing one more day longer than it has to. And so I think that at least for me, I cannot make sense of not using all the power I have to, like I said, with the parable of the MMA fighter and his neighbor, to use all the power I have to oppose the greatest evil. And with that said, we also need the gospel. We need to seek the flourishing of our neighbors, no matter how much melanin is in their skin. We need to seek the flourishing of our neighbors and even those who see us as enemies. We just need love. The objective purpose of life is love, and we need to love each other. And really, I think America, we're on the one of two things is going to happen: either revival or horrible violence. And I'm praying for the former. Let's have revival. We've got to preach the truth and live the truth. and speak the truth in love.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would. It's interesting that you would say that, because there's a movie, Civil War, that's out or coming out that seems to be, to me, if anything could incite people, that would be that movie or that thought of Civil War.
I haven't seen that.
I swear that I pray that our country never becomes so emotionally entwined that they can't think straight and work out the problems that we have. I pray that every day. And I appreciate you guys on the Real Squabble today. I think we had a real squabble, so that's good.
But it was in love and respect, and I love it. Of course.
Well, yeah, I've loved and respected Glenn since we were in our 20s. So I've known him for a few years, and I think I've known you for a decade or more now. So
that's crazy.
I appreciate you too, and thank you so much for joining us. It's Dr. Tim Stratton, and Glenn Wolf, my good friend out in Seattle. You go to a Starbucks and have a cup of coffee for us. And please feel free to subscribe to The Real Squabble on YouTube. Share this with your friends and check us out on Facebook, The Real Squabble.